Things are going to get worse in the economy. There's a financial issue at the same time as you have this internal conflict. So I think that that's going to make for a risky situation.
Ray Dalio is a prominent American billionaire investor. He founded Bridgewater Associates out of his two-bedroom Manhattan apartment in 1975 and grew it into the world's largest hedge fund, with over $235 billion in total assets under management. Dalio is also popular for his uncanny ability to predict global economics, markets, and geopolitical trends. In this video, we'll explore his latest warning and what it could mean for you. The current economic landscape. A seasoned macro investor, Ray Dalio has over 50 years of experience in the global economic space. He's been through all sorts of devastating crises and cycles. These experiences have driven him to study historical patterns and cause-effect relationships to anticipate future events and make informed decisions in global markets. In the process, he's become a pro in studying history and offering insights into the current and the future. And what better way to predict the future than by comparing the present and the past? A quick look at the current global economic landscape reveals a slower growth than expected.
The broadest sense is be out of cash, have little or no participation in interest rates, particularly if they're close to zero interest rates, because if the economy goes down, they will offer very little protection to your portfolio because they won't go up much because they're close to zero interest rates.
The International Monetary Fund, IMF, forecasts a decline in growth from 3.4% in 2022 to 2.8% in 2023 and 3% in 2024. Amid financial sector turmoil, persistent inflationary pressures, and the ongoing effects of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, global growth is projected to weaken further and lead to financial dislocations in the most vulnerable emerging markets and developing economies, EMDEs. Many nations continue to face huge economic challenges. Concerns about inflation, escalating debt levels, an aging population, technological disruptions, and the widening income gap inequality abound. That's even without mentioning that the world is recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic 3 years later. Some nations have implemented policy measures to counter these challenges. Nevertheless, others still face uncertainties about the current economic model's sustainability in the long term. Looking back in history, Dalio notes 5 big things. He calls them 5 big forces that hadn't occurred at a substantial magnitude in his lifetime, but had occurred in the 1930 to 1945 period. These are: 1. The financial economic force. Public debts have hit the roof. Debt growth rates near record highs, and the central bank is engaged in printing money and buying debt. Debt monetization like never before. 2. The domestic order force. Internal conflicts within countries, are at an all-time high due to the ever-widening gap in wealth and value and the greatest rise in populism.
The 3 big things that are happening to us is first the financial, that's happening at a macro level, which is the creation of a lot of debt and the printing of a lot of money, and that's producing the stagflation that we have. The second big influence is the amount of internal conflict that is existing. It's particularly a problem when you have the first problem, because the first problem produces financial problems, which produces stress and antagonism.
3. The International World Order Force. Major global powers. More notably, the US and China no longer see eye to eye, and the world order is rapidly changing. 4. Acts of nature. Pandemics, floods, and droughts, collectively known as climate change. 5. Technology. Technological disruptions, including the first and second industrial revolution, computing and the internet, and AI revolution. Ray Dalio's last warning: the collapse has begun. According to Ray, these 5 forces now occur at the most enormous magnitude since 1930 to 45. More importantly, each force transpires at the same scale, just as before historical breakdowns and seismic shifts in domestic and world orders, and reinforces each other to create what he calls the big cycle. Here are his predictions and warnings of what's coming. 1. The big cycle debt crisis will get worse. In my opinion, we are at the beginning of a very classic late big cycle debt crisis, when the supply-demand gap, when you're producing too much debt and have a shortage of buyers. Dalio notes in a Bloomberg interview, "Things are going to get worse for the economy," he adds. According to him, America is in the middle of the short-term debt cycle. Historically, this phase lasts 7 years, plus or minus about 3 years. The U.S. has been through 12.5 short-term debt cycles since the formation of the new monetary world order in 1945. That means we're now halfway through the 13th cycle. It's at this point of the cycle, when the central bank tightens monetary policies to fight inflation, that precedes the periods of debt accumulation and economic contraction. Dalio says that's what's happening now. He's built his argument around the most recent debt ceiling bill, approved by Congress and President Joe Biden. The Treasury Department announced plans to release $1.6 trillion in T-bills this year until the end of 2023 to bolster its cash reserves. Dalio is on the contrary opinion, arguing that raising the debt ceiling wasn't enough unless there was a plan on how to control spending. Raising the debt limit the way Congress and the presidents have repeatedly done will ultimately lead to a disastrous financial collapse, he added. Dalio also states that America is in a late and risk-laden phase of the long-term debt cycle. Debt assets and debt liability levels have risen so high that it has become difficult to provide lender creditors an interest rate that sufficiently offsets inflation to make them want to hold this debt as an asset. Doing so without imposing interest rates high enough to hurt the borrower-debtor unacceptability is proving impossible.
In my opinion, we are at the beginning of a very classic late big cycle debt crisis, when the supply-demand gap, when you're producing too much debt, and you have also a shortage of buyers. What's happening now, as we have to sell all this debt, is we then do have enough buyers. There are changes now in terms of the quantities in the world that are being held by large investors around the world that have lost money in these treasury bonds and so on.
The unsustainable debt growth suggests we're approaching a pivotal turning point that will reshape the financial landscape. In other words, we're on the brink of a significant debt financial economic shakeup that will necessitate massive changes to the financial order. Meanwhile, the U.S. Treasury will have to sell a sizable amount of debt due to large deficits, but there's insufficient demand for that government debt. If this persists, the Fed will raise interest rates even higher or resort to extensive money printing and bond purchases, devaluing the currency. Given these conditions, the debt and financial landscape may worsen over the next year or two. 2. The rise of populist leaders could lead to civil war. Democracy works best when the ruling political parties and factions accept that power is transient and that voters are only conditionally loyal to parties. Unfortunately, the number of populist leaders and parties in power today is almost five-fold compared to the period after the Cold War. Worse, the number has tripled since the start of the 21st century. There has been growing populist extremism across many countries, particularly in the U.S., and shrinking bipartisan moderates. Throughout history, populism and internal conflicts have repeatedly occurred when large gaps in wealth and values existed simultaneously with bad economic conditions. At such times, most voters elect populist political leaders who will fight and win for them, and reject those who will compromise. In his book, Principles for Dealing with a Changing World Order, Dalio describes the current state of the U.S. as Stage 5, when there are bad financial conditions and intense conflict of the internal order cycle. He details it on pages 167 to 83. That's the state the U.S. is in right now. As for what's coming, next year will be a big election year in the U.S. Many populist candidates will fight over 33 Senate seats, the presidency, and control of the House. The elections will likely happen amid bad economic times, so chances are the fights will be vicious, and there will be a real test of democracy, which requires rule following and compromising to work. Considering populists' commitment to winning at all costs and reluctance to compromise, this election won't go as smoothly as expected. You can see this playing out even now in Donald Trump and his followers waging war against the justice system. So no matter how you view it, the Democrats and Republicans will fight tooth and nail for victories, and neither side will be willing to compromise. For that reason, Dalio predicts a 30% chance the U.S. will break out into civil war in the next decade due to political polarization.
And we see extremism in both of the political parties. Okay, we see that split. A populist is an individual or a leader or a political person who will win at all costs. That the rules of the game don't as much matter. And so we're in the January 6th type of incident and so on is very interesting. The political system in terms of primaries and the parties tends to create that sort of polarity.
3. China's growing power will pose a challenge to the U.S. As far as the international world order force goes, China's meteoric rise over the last 2 decades has reshaped global politics. Since joining the World Trade Organization in 2001, China has begun acting like a global power. It has transformed global supply chains and partnered with emerging economics across Africa, Asia, and Latin America. In the process, Beijing has threatened the U.S.-led global order, increasing tensions with Washington. The US and China are already fighting over many issues and are closer to some form of war, whether an economic war or worse, a military one. From issues with Taiwan and chips to dealing with Russia and sanctioning investments, the conflict between the two is closer to the brink. Ray Dalio predicts the conflicts between the US and China will intensify in this electioneering round. That is because in the US, almost everyone is anti-China, so those running for office will want to outdo each other with China bashing. 4. Acts of nature. Hedge fund titan Ray Dalio isn't only concerned about the economy. Like many of us, he's also worried about climate change and committed to positively influencing the fight against global warming. It worries me. It's almost like I worry for man, Dalio told CNBC Make It. Dalio said history has shown him that natural disasters are often catalysts in speeding the end of a long-term cycle, and their increased intensity makes them a clear risk at present. Acts of nature are, of course, more of a wild card. They're harder to predict accurately, but Dalio stated natural disasters appear to worsen and are likely to be more costly and damaging over the next 5 to 10 years. He's also cautioned that the world will soon start feeling the climate change impact as it enters an El Niño phase over the next year. 5. Technology. The fifth megatrend, technology, human inventiveness, will likely be a major disruptor. But like acts of nature, it's hard to tell exactly what we can expect. There are arguments over the potential level of disruptions that AI will bring. That makes sense given that AI is still in early development. Several elements of AI have added to the general uncertainty, including the development speed and potential costs associated with deployment. But one thing for sure is that generative AI and other technological advances can cause massive productivity and destruction, job losses.
The future is different than the past, and you don't have understanding. AI is dangerous. If the future is similar to the past, so you can look at things. If you're doing a surgery, you can have robots do a surgery because that same cutting, that same action is going to happen the same way. You don't have any problems. That's going to be great. So the power of machine learning to make AI is great, okay? But when you give up the understanding and the future is different from the past, it's a different story. The markets are difficult that way, because if something is learned, it's not valuable.
Preparing for what's coming. Whether or not you believe Dalio's warning of a great collapse is less important than recognizing global markets are dealing with incredible levels of uncertainty. That realization should make you prepare for anything that may come your way. So how should you, the investor, prepare for what's coming? Follow these steps to protect your finances if Ray's warnings come to pass. 1. Diversify your portfolio. Diversifying your investments across different asset classes, industries, and geographical regions can help mitigate risk. Doing so reduces the impact of a downturn in any single area, as other investments might perform better during such times. 2. Regularly assess your risk and rebalance your portfolio. Regularly assessing your risk tolerance and adjusting your investment portfolio accordingly is vital. As economic conditions change, so do the prospects of various assets. Stay informed and make necessary adjustments to ensure your portfolio aligns with your risk appetite. 3. Build an emergency fund. Establishing and maintaining an emergency fund is a fundamental step to reducing risk. This cash reserve can provide a safety net during unforeseen events, preventing you from tapping into your investments at unfavorable times. 4. Manage your debt. Given the uncertain times ahead, managing your debt is crucial. High-interest debts can erode your financial stability quickly. Prioritize paying down debts and consider refinancing options if they align with your financial strategy. 5. Continuously educate yourself. Staying informed is essential. Continuously educate yourself about market trends and economic developments. Additionally, seek advice from financial professionals to get valuable insights tailored to your circumstances. Thank you for joining us today. Remember, the future might be uncertain, but our preparedness doesn't have to be. If you enjoyed this video, please show us love by liking, sharing, or commenting. If you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel, and before you go, remember to click on the thumbnail for the following video. We've got more thrilling episodes lined up for you.